Allahu Akbar. Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Mun gode wa Allah, wannan shine baraki na wani gari na suna shi ba su zoi. Na kirawa ne Allahu Akbar, Allah ya ba mu nasara kansu. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar.
Imagine the dusty roads of northeastern Nigeria, the early dawn light creeping over small villages, where children run out to fetch water and neighbors gather for morning prayers. Now imagine that same dawn brought not hope, but fear, dread of what might happen today, what might vanish tomorrow. This is Nigeria's story since 2009, a story of insurgency, of communal grief, of questions about faith, violence, and justice. And in this story, one of the unexpected chapters is the American connection, the day that the United States stepped in, through its highest office, to call Nigeria a country of particular concern in the struggle over religious freedom. Make sure to like this video and subscribe. Let Nigeria Christians' voice and pain be heard globally. We begin around 2009. In the far northeast of Nigeria, the group Boko Haram ignited its campaign. At first, this was in the headlines as militant attacks and suicide bombings in towns and villages. But for the Christian communities in the region, it quickly morphed into a siege of everyday life. In April 2012, for example, a suicide car bombing on Easter Sunday in the city of Kaduna sent a message: Christian worshippers were vulnerable even in their places of worship. At the same time, in the so-called Middle Belt, that complex mosaic of ethnicity, religion, and land use between North and South, another pattern took hold. Herders, farmers, villages, and faith communities began to clash, sometimes driven by resource competition, sometimes by historical grievance, sometimes by religion. A U.S. monitoring body reported that in 2012 more were killed in religiously related violence in Nigeria by Muslim-Christian communal fighting than even by Boko Haram. By 2013, the independent agency ISWAP, United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, noted that religious freedom declined in Nigeria, primarily due to attacks by Boko Haram and despite government attempts to protect churches. So the scene was set: the explosives, the church bombings, the villages terrified at dawn. As the years progressed, the conflict broadened. In May 2014, twin bombings in the city of Jos, in Plateau State, killed more than 100 people. A marketplace and bus station hit in quick succession. While the attacks were not always explicitly labeled by the perpetrators as targeting Christians, the ripple effect was clear: violence, fear, displacement. By 2020, Boko Haram had splintered. A faction known as ISWAP, Islamic State West Africa Province, had emerged. The theater of violence widened. In the nationwide context, armed bandits, virtually criminal gangs hijacking head of farmer conflicts, kidnappings, and attacks on entire villages added complexity. Many victims were Christian, many were Muslim, but the pattern of terror and vulnerability locked in for communities across northern Nigeria. In December 2020, the ISWAP condemned Boko Haram's attacks and expressly called on the U.S. government to designate Nigeria as a country of particular concern. The violence was not incidental. It was part of a broader pattern that could trigger international religious freedom mechanisms. If the Northeast had the headlines, the Middle Belt and Northwest held the quieter tragedies. Villages burned at twilight, farmers hacked down, pastors kidnapped, credit lines of fee drawn across Christian communities. In June 2025, for example, an attack on a Catholic mission in Yelawata, Benue State, killed at least 100. Some estimates say 200. The ISWAP called this a worst attack in the region during this surge. Yet here lies the complexity. Many analysts say that the violence isn't simply Christians being killed because they are Christian. Data from the monitoring group ACOLD suggests that in Nigeria between 2020 and 2025 there were at least 389 cases of violence targeting Christians, 318 deaths, and 197 targeting Muslims, 418 deaths. In other words, this is a conflict of many drivers: land, identity, religion, opportunity, impunity. Still, for many Christian communities the feeling is unmistakable: the terror, the vulnerability, the sense of being targeted. One pastor asked what happened to the right to worship without fear. The term genocide began to surface in public discourse. One commentary piece asked bluntly, are Nigerian Christians facing an existential threat? Now let's switch scope. The U.S., through its legislation, the International Religious Freedom Act, gives the president power to designate a country of particular concern, CPC, when there are systematic, ongoing, egregious violations of religious freedom. The watchdog ISWAP had for years recommended Nigeria be designated CPC. In 2020, under the Trump administration, Nigeria was first designated as a CPC. Then under the Biden administration, the designation was removed. Christian watchdog groups voiced strong disappointment. Fast forward to late 2025. On the 31st of October, 2025, the Associated Press reported that President Trump announced Nigeria would again be designated a CPC, saying, "Christianity is facing an existential threat in Nigeria. Radical Islamists are responsible for this mass slaughter. I am hereby making Nigeria a country of particular concern." In a public post, Trump also said he ordered the U.S. to plan possible military action if the Nigerian government did not curb the killing of Christians and declared that U.S. aid would cease. This pronouncement brought Nigeria squarely into the geopolitical spotlight. From being a country wrestling with internal security challenges, it became a flashpoint in international religious freedom debate and U.S. policy. The Nigerian government's reaction was swift and firm. They rejected the idea that they were a persecuting state. One spokesman said the U.S. claims were based on faulty data and mischaracterized Nigeria's security realities. The defense chiefs, the information ministers, all emphasized, the challenge is terrorism, bandits, insurgents, not a state policy of killing Christians. On the ground, analysts caution the viewer. Yes, Christians are victimized, but so are Muslims, and some of the attackers are motivated by land grabs, economic desperation, ethnic clashes, not purely faith. The location matters. The identities of the victims matter. The motives often run deep and mixed. One major question remains: when does a series of massacres and mass attacks cross the line into targeted persecution or genocide? When does a government's failure to protect become culpability? The CPC designation is one such threshold in U.S. foreign policy terms. The fact that President Trump invoked it and publicly threatened Nigeria made it clear. This is no longer just an internal Nigerian story, it is an international one. Allow us to pause and look at the human side. In Yellowwater in Benue State, the Diocesan Foundation described how entire families were slaughtered and burned beyond recognition. Infants, mothers, fathers wiped out in an hour. People were scattered everywhere, said the local priest. In another place, Christian villagers, waking before dawn to pray, found that the church roof was blown away, the congregation decimated. In Kaduna in 2012, the triple church bombing deeply shook the Christian community. One bomber didn't differentiate by worship style or denomination. The target was faith itself. The memory lingers of children in northern Nigeria who ask, "Will I be safe at Sunday school?" On the other side, there are also Muslim victims of the same insurgencies in the northwest, the northeast, showing that sometimes the violence does not sort by faith alone. But for the Christian communities, the feeling of being mocked persists. Wait a second. Have you liked this video? Hit the like button and subscribe. Let's continue. Why tell this story? Because faith is a powerful identity. For a Christian in northern Nigeria, going to church is not just worship, it's an act of community, of belonging, of hope. When attacks strike that place of belonging, they ripple out. A destroyed church means a community displaced. A kidnapped pastor means children without leadership. A burned village means a people uprooted. And because Nigeria is Africa's most populous nation, over 200 million, and nearly evenly split between Christians and Muslims, what happens there echoes beyond its borders. Some U.S. lawmakers have called Nigeria the deadliest place in the world to be a Christian. The U.S. stepping into this story via the CPC designation means the international community is watching. When President Trump said that the U.S. may halt aid, that it may intervene militarily, that phrase "guns a-blazing" appeared in some reports. Whether or not those words become action, they signal that religious freedom concerns are driving foreign policy in new ways. As the camera pulls back, we have to ask, what comes next? How will Nigeria's government hold perpetrators to account? Experience shows that impunity fuels more violence. ISWAP noted long ago that Nigeria's government often failed to prosecute perpetrators of religiously related violence. How will Christian communities and Muslim alike rebuild trust, rebuild their homes, rebuild their lives? Displacement has become a long-term reality. How will the international community respond? Will the US CPC designation bring sanctions, aid shifts, diplomatic pressure? Or will it drive Nigeria away? How will the narrative settle? Is this a genocide? Is this religious persecution? Or is it a complex mixture of ideological terrorism, land conflict, state weakness, religious targeting? The answer matters because it changes what the remedy looks like. For many Christians in Nigeria, there's hope that the world will hear their story, hope that their suffering will not be overlooked. But there is also caution, hope that the story will not be overwritten by politics or by simplified narratives that ignore Muslim victims or local complexity. So here we are, at the edge of the frame. A film about Nigeria, about Christians under fire, about an American president's public warning. But more than that, a film about lives interrupted, communities uprooted, and faith tested. From 2009's early bombings to 2025's international diplomatic drama, the violence in Nigeria has changed shape but persistently threatened the vulnerable. For Christian believers in Nigeria, worshipping, living, praying in places like Kaduna, Benue, Borno, or even more remote towns is no longer simply routine. It is laden with risk and meaning. When President Trump declared Nigeria a country of particular concern and said the U.S. stood with persecuted Christians, he turned the spotlight. But as we've seen, turning the spotlight is only a start. The work of justice, protection, rebuilding is far from over. In the end, this story is not just about victims, it's about hope. Hope that communities will rebuild. Hope that history will remember. Hope that in places of light and shadow, the light will return. I still want to beg you to like this video and share it, and again subscribe. We uncovering deeper soon.